Welcome everyone to the second episode of Techlitical, a place where four college friends talk about tech, their lives as professionals, and college. Today, I'm your host Ayush, and with me I have Samarth, I have Yashwant, as well as Dheeraj. So, the one question that most of us get asked very frequently from our juniors and a bunch of other people is how important is DSA for our placements? And let's start off with Dheeraj, the guy who's working in Amazon right now. So, Dheeraj, can you tell how important is DSA for placements?
Yeah, hi everyone. From my perspective, DSA is very much important. It acts like a bridge when you are want to apply to companies like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, basically the FANG companies. So the first round in all these companies, they'll be testing you on your core concepts of DSA. By DSA, I don't mean advanced DSA concepts, but the basic concepts of DSA. Like you must know what exactly stack is, what exactly queue is. Just you need not know to write the code, but you must understand the internal logic of how a hash map functions and all those things. So I feel like if you know DSA and you are very much confident and you have a good grasp on the basics of DSA, then it will ease your way through the campus placement as well as through the off-campus placements as well.
So, coming to Yashwant, what are your thoughts? So, you got an off campus job, right? So, what was your experience with DSA?
Yeah, I got an off-campus job, so I'll start with that. So one thing is DSA is important, but for off-campus it's not that important, I'll say, because one of the things that companies look at DSA is like a filtering process. Obviously, DSA is very much helpful in your day-to-day tasks in your company, but companies also keep tough questions or easy questions based on the number of candidates applying at that job. In on campus, for example, Amazon came and literally around 1,500 people applied. I guess I'm not pretty sure, though. 1,500 people applied, and they had to filter out people. So they were doing that. In off campus, if you're targeting a company and if you're applying, there's not really much of competition over that. So it's only your profile that stands out over there to get a call from them. But definitely, they do ask DSA questions. And again, for off campus, it's again based on the role. If you're applying for the same software engineering role or SDE1 or stuff like that, they'll definitely ask all the exotic data structures available there, trees, stuff like that, and dynamic programming and other stuff. But in my case, since I was applying for Android development, which is kind of this front end part of the tech stack in any company, so they didn't grind me that much. But I'll still say DSA is important. At least stack, queues, lists, string operations, those things are very important to crack any coding interview. That's my thoughts. Those are my thoughts.
Right. Yeah. So I guess you both bring up like some crucial points, which we'll get to the end at the end. Mm-hmm. So the guy who I'm most dying to ask this question to, Samarth, how much DSA preparation did you do for the job that you're doing right now?
So, as if you guys don't know, I'm a product designer. So I used to study DSA all night long.
By the way, for the ones who didn't get it, that was sarcasm.
So let's just say DSA for me was design study algorithms. So I think, but I did have a lot of people around me who were applying for campus placements and who were applying for off-campus placements as well. And I did look at them studying on basic concepts of DSA and even discussing amongst themselves and understanding the core concepts of DSA. So I think that helped me understand that stuff as well. And it's very important to understand those stuff. I did not see any person around me who's gotten a good placement or off campus or on campus mugging stuff up. They were just basically understanding the concepts, and that's how I take everything in life. But that's how I think you should prepare for DSA as well. When it comes to product design, if there are anybody who's trying to apply for a product design role, just don't care about DSA, I would say.
So I guess that sums it up if you are looking to be a UI UX stuff, which we'll talk about in detail later. So I guess my experience with DSA was similar to, I guess, as Yashwant said, I, being a security engineer or like DevSecOps engineer to be more precise, I didn't really have to deal with DSA that much. But as far as I could like understand how it goes for at least campus placements for that matter, is that they have the first barrier to entry is DSA. I mean, they don't really grill you on questions, but the questions that you encounter are pure DSA questions, which I think most of us would encounter on sites like Geeks for Geeks and all. So my experience was that I actually saw a whole bunch of people getting in through mugging up stuff. This might not be true for off-campus roles for sure, because that's mostly interview-based stuff. But on campus, because maybe it's because of the way that they are faced with like a challenge of doing this for maybe 3,000, 4,000 people at once, that they are forced to give out questions, and based on the people who are solving those questions or the maximum right attempts or whatever, they have to choose in people. I mean, like they can't do individual interviews for 4,000 people actually. So that's where I personally felt that people who kind of were able to mug up solutions in a way that when they encountered a question, they were able to just vomit out the answer. They were able to get through at least the initial few rounds, which were technical computer based. They might or might not get through the job because there's an interview at the end anyways. But talking specifically about cracking the initial barrier to entry on campus placements, I think mugging up is the least effort strategy to go about doing. Coming to Yashwant's point, I think Yashwant, you said that DSA is not that important for like off-campus placements, but you also mentioned it depends on the role, right? So I kind of agree with that point, that it depends on the role. For me, it was not that big of an issue, but I'm pretty sure Dheeraj, if he tried off-campus, or maybe he has some experience with that, so I'm pretty sure they'll ask you DSA questions, be it in the form of like a technical round or an interview where they like grill you on questions right then and there in person.
I'd like to add one point over here. So one of
Sure.
my friends who was working with me in Zomato, when I initially joined, he was full-time. So just after a month after I joined, so he applied for Amazon off campus. He was also a fresher in the sense he completed it. He is 2019 pass out, so it was around like 6 months he was working in Zomato, so it didn't qualify as a very full-time employee. So in the sense, he's a fresher, and he had 3 rounds of DSA in Amazon when he applied to off-campus. So obviously, even for off-campus, you need DSA if you're aiming FANG companies.
Right.
Yeah, even if you are aiming for some SD roles, because it's more of generic. If you know the like Yashwant applied for Android, and if Samarth applied for product, and Ayush applied for security, so in those cases, it's not that relevant because you are very much have good expertise on your domain, so they'll ask you from your domain only. But when you go with those SD jobs, so in most of the companies they do ask for DSA.
Yeah, I guess it's very much dependent upon the fact that SDs are not, for the most part, if it's like a big company or something, are supposed to be tech specific, right? Because the company, I believe, expects them to be able to solve problems rather than know a particular language or a framework, right?
Yeah,
and that
exactly.
kind of plays into the fact that if they know DSA, the company has some kind of assurance that, hey, if he encounters a certain problem, he might be able to solve this problem, and we can give him the tools or like tell him what tools to use.
Correct.
Right. So, okay. So another really frequently asked question about placements is how important is CGPA? Like, I guess we'll start with Samarth this time. So, what about you, Samarth? How important was CGPA for you for getting placed yourself, and how do you perceive CGPA's importance for like people around you that you have encountered?
I think it makes sense to start with the person who had the lowest CGPA. But yeah, in terms of CGPA, I think there are two ways of going about it. If you want an on-campus placement, please do maintain the bare minimum of a 9 CGPA. If you do not want an on-campus placement, you want to go for off-campus, that's basically you're applying for something that you're interested in, and it's probably not something you're studying in your college, at least in your bachelor's. It could be something you're studying in your master's and you're focusing towards it, but at least in your bachelor's, which is much more generic, you might not be studying that, or you might have just taken up one course in that. So at that position, it's more about your interest and not your CGPA. But keeping a bare minimum in mind that I want to keep a 8 CGPA, or even if for some people if it's 7 CGPA, so that at least I have something to fall back on, because it's always good to have a backup option in life, right? Because you never know what can happen. We never thought that something like COVID would pop up, and just like that, anything can happen in life. And at certain positions, if you do not get into off-campus placement, you always have a fallback option. So just keep in mind, just keep a bare minimum. You set that standard for yourself. There's nobody telling you that you have to maintain 9 or 8 or 7 CGPA. You decided for yourself that what is good for you and how you can balance it between off-campus and on-campus, and just maintain that. I don't think so there is any push into that I need to get the first position in college and stuff like that, because even if you're in the top 100, you get the same opportunity as being the first or second, because frankly speaking, there's a lot of competition and companies know about that. And just research with your seniors that what all was taken into consideration with which company. So that in that way you can decide which CGPA you want. So if you want to get into something like Amazon, you know that you need a 9 CGPA. If you decide, okay, I do not want to get into Amazon, I can apply for companies like Atlassian, or even apply for companies like Swiggy that come into the campus. You're fine. Okay, I don't need a 9 CGPA. I can manage with an 8 CGPA as well. So a little bit of talking with seniors, that would help a lot in that scenario.
Okay, I see. So yeah, I kind of agree with the fact that the CGPA depends on the context that you're applying for, and having a fallback is definitely an important thing, especially for people who are looking to go for placements rather than something like higher studies or something. Even actually, if you go for higher studies, I believe CGPA is like the most important criteria that you can think of. But yeah, let's ask Dheeraj. Dheeraj, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I completely agree with Samarth on that. Like, you must maintain a bare minimum CGPA. So from my point of view, considering all the colleges in India, a bare minimum of 8 CGPA is enough for getting placed in any company all across the world. But when it comes to higher studies, it's better to be a 9-pointer, because it impacts a lot when you apply for courses like outside India. And coming to the off-campus placements, also CGPA is not a bar. So I guess in Microsoft and all those companies, that's 6 or 6.5. So I guess CGPA is not a bar in getting placed at a big company. But yeah, in colleges like VIT, Manipal, Thapar, so where you have a lot of students. So at that time, what college placement cell does is they filter on CGPA. So at that time also CGPA comes very handy. So in colleges like this, it's better to maintain a 9 point.
So if you distilled on what you both kind of said, is basically if you're looking for college placements, it's ideal to have like a higher CGPA, probably maybe 9, and in general in life, I guess 8 CGPA is fine.
Yeah.
In fact, even a 7 CGPA should be fine. So my personal account with this is that I did never kind of aimed for like a 9 CGPA, because I knew that that's like an effort that I'd rather put in somewhere else. And knowing that the fact that I was going to stick to having an 8+ CGPA kind of went till the end, that I knew it was decent enough for like most off-campus stuff, if it was ever required, that is. And I think a lot of companies actually have a really low CGPA that most students or people don't really know about. That as far as I remember from my Microsoft interview, from like some off-campus thingy that I was part of, the CGPA criteria was actually 7 CGPA. Whereas when the same company came onto our campus, the CGPA was, I think, around 9.
9.5.
So, 9.5, yeah. Okay, there you go. So that's I get it. Like, why do college placement cells have to do it? Because they have to like shorten the number of people that are going to sit for that particular placement, because companies can't be like, we want to interview just everyone, right? And they'd rather like have the creme de la creme of like the batch there is, than having to do this for everyone. Anyways, like, let's move on to Yashwant. Yashwant, what's your idea about CGPA and how does it affect placements?
So for myself, I mostly got all my internships or job through off-campus only, but I'll say no one has ever asked me CGPA at all. Okay, I mean, because when I only share my resume, and then they check that and come like that. But as Dheeraj and Samarth and you said, it's very important to have fallback options as well. I mean, to be honest, I don't have much points to add to this because it was mostly summarized by them.
Yes,
but in
sir.
my perspective, CGPA was not asked in off-campus for me. Two companies, one is Redbus, one is Zomato. I can say mostly product-based companies or small startups, they don't really care about your CGPA. It's about your profile and your skills they see. But the thing is, if you're not maintaining a CGPA, you have to make sure your profile stands out from the crowd, or you are maintaining your CGPA. There has to be something for you to get a job like that.
Definitely. I actually second what Yashwant said, that it doesn't really matter what your CGPA is based on the role that you're applying for, especially because even I had a similar experience where none of the people that I talked to were asking my CGPA for all my interviews that I did and whatnot. In fact, there were instances where the thing of CGPA and like college marks and all came up, and the interviewers told me that they flunked classes and all, and we laughed about it. So it kind of depends on what you want to do, guys, and I guess we can take it from there, that CGPA is important based on the context. So okay, so talking about like subjects that we go through in college, we as CS students, me, Yashwant and Dheeraj, we've gone about I think 40-45 subjects. We're studying different aspects of computer science and whatnot. But when it comes to placements, I think the most stressed out topics that we have are operating systems, database management systems, and computer networks, right? And DSA also, but DSA is already something that we've talked about, and it's a domain of its own. So let's stick to subjects, domain specific subjects. So what are your thoughts on not chapters, but topics like OS, DBMS, and computer networks? Yashwant, what do you want to go? What do you want to say about that?
It is very important for me, at least. Not just for job, just for your daily. Not just getting your going through interviews and all, but even in daily life, I see it's kind of important nowadays. So to be honest, I was not asked a lot of OS questions and DBMS questions and all, because my role, I applied for Android development. But I know my friends, a lot of people, even for off-campus and in on-campus placement, they were asked a lot about database questions, specifically SQL. People used to ask them to write about SQL, ask them to write SQL commands, and they used to ask network questions. And database is something that's really important. And OS, actually, I haven't heard a lot of people being asked about OS questions, but it's really, really important for you to understand if you're developing something which is OS specific. For me, it was very important because I work on the Android OS, so I need to know what the thread is, process lifecycle, and stuff like that. And also DBMS helped me a lot, because in Android we used to do this caching, and also that it helped. And if you're applying for backend roles, it is the main thing that gets asked every time. Computer networks is probably Ayush might get that, because security and other stuff requires computer networks. Computer networks is something that you need to study more deeply, depending on the role you apply, either it's off campus or on campus. And I'd say that. And other subjects like cryptography or other subjects depends on, again, the role, I'll say.
Right. So yeah, I mean, knowing anything other than these 3-4 topics, I guess, is kind of a bonus for the companies that interview you, because they have kind of a set of questions that they've prepared for things like this. Obviously, the interviews goes on to be a more personal experience, but I believe they have to start off with a standard set of questions, right? Because how do you personalize everything and then segregate different interviews? And say which one's better and which one wasn't. So I guess it makes sense to know stuff what you want to do, and obviously learn what you want to learn. But talking about these specific topics, again, I think on campus, obviously they hold very much importance, because questions and all, interview questions come from them. But again, off campus scenario is very domain and role specific. So as Yashwant said, it depends on what you're applying for. Coming to you, Dheeraj, what are your thoughts on this? What's your take?
Yeah, I also agree with what Yashwant said. Like, it's very much important when it comes to our day-to-day job. Like, when we are designing a system, we should have a clear idea about the basics of database management systems, so that we can choose what kind of database we want to, and whether we need to do sharding and all those things. And when it comes to jobs like data engineer and all those things, so at that time in interviews also they ask questions from DBMS. So again, as you all said, like, it's role specific. So sometimes companies might ask, sometimes they might not ask. Like, recently I was interviewed by D Shaw. So what they are moving into is, like, they are trying to switch to this core computer science subjects like OS, DBMS, and computer networks, because according to them, like, DSA, as Ayush said, like, everyone is bugging up and they only have a set of specific questions. But in subjects like OS, DBMS, you can go in depth and ask about some difficult concepts, which many of them they are not very much clear about paging and how memory works, how you can handle all those things. So that's my take on this.
Right. And what would you say your thoughts are on system design? Like, is it required for an entry-level job?
No, system design, it's not required for an entry level job, but sometimes companies do ask about database design, but not exactly system design. So if you can design a database, that, and then you are very much good for any on campus as well as off campus placements.
Okay, understood. So, so me, Yashwant, and Dheeraj are from CS background. But let's talk to Samath, who's not exactly studied all these topics, but still is not exactly unaware of these topics either. So, Samath, how would you, as like a third person, from a third person perspective, say that these topics, how important they are?
When it comes to certain technical topics, all I can say is I'm from the electronics and communication background, and I have done my job in product design. So I am as far as away from these topics as it can get. So when it comes to these topics, all I can say is that just talk to people who are around you who are studying these topics. Probably get involved in projects with people who are doing these topics, even if you're not directly involved with people who are developing it, and you are the person who's developing it. You do not have to be that person. Just be involved in the domain you like. Like, I was involved in a project like a designer. That would help you at least understand the basic fundamentals of it. That helps you out in any job, any domain, because having a general overview of any topic that is not related to your domain, or even if it's remotely related to your domain, would help you out understand your team better. And that's something a lot of people look into when it comes to off-campus placements as well, because even if you're giving an interview and you talk like, okay, I have a basic idea of how to do this and this as well, so they kind of take it as a positive way that this could help in team building, and this person would bond in well with that team as well, and that the work would be done better. So that's a plus point. You don't have to focus on it, just pay attention to what's happening around you, I would say.
Right. Okay. So I guess that kind of brings us to the end of like our first segment, where we talk about like most kind of frequently asked questions about placement. Let's move on to some other topics that are very much of interest for like the most people in campus and like college. The most another like frequently asked question, and like one of the key differences that people want to know about is what's the scene with like campus and off-campus placements. Like, how do they work? What's the differences? And what are the different things that we have to do about them? So why don't we start with someone who did an off-campus and like even in fact an off-topic internship and then scored a job as well. So Samath, what would you say are the differences, like key differences between campus and off-campus placements?
So let's just take it like that. On-campus placement is running a marathon, and off-campus placement is going out for a run yourself. So in a marathon, it's longer, it's more difficult, but you have people around you, so you look at them and say, okay, these people are also doing the same thing I'm doing, so we're on the same path. So I have people around me. While you're going for an off-campus placement, you know the path you're going on. You know that you'll come back home, you'll get back home, and you know you can stop whenever you want. but you don't have people around you. You don't have the people who are taking the same path as you, because everybody is applying for a different position, and the people who are applying for a different position can't guide you in a very direct manner. But yeah, that's how I would give an analogy to it. But at the end, all you need to understand is that both of them are right in their own senses. You just need to figure out what is right for you. Some people prefer a job wherein they can explore, and a lot of people are not really focused on one development side or any other domain, or whatever they want to focus on. They are not very keen on sticking on one thing, so they want to uh, get into a very generic role where they can expand their horizons, and that's where on-campus placements help out as well. You need to understand what on-campus roles your university offers. You need to talk to your seniors, you need to talk to your friends, that these were the placements that happened last year, and figure out that okay, these suit me. These some might be direct, some might be general, but it gives you a very general idea of what kind of things you can get when you apply for on-campus placements. But when it comes to off-campus placements, you have a very big horizon, but you need to be very, very well prepared, and you need to be very, very well articulated on the fact that this is, now you're not competing with people who are just in your university. You're competing with the world, and you don't even see the faces of people who you're competing with. So just keep that in mind, and you need to be better than all of them. And it's a little more ruthless, but both of them have their own fun. It's up to you whichever way you want to go. But I would never say that stick to one position. You should always have a fallback option. That does not mean that you put in equal amount of hours in both positions. If you're applying for off campus, stick to off campus. But if you have an option where you find a good option for you in on campus, just make sure you're ready for that as well. So in our university, in most universities, you need to pay a certain amount of security deposit to sit for placements. Just make sure you pay that, so that if a company comes that is of interest to you, you have the option going there. If you do not have a backup option, or you haven't paid that, you might regret it later. So just be prepared. At the end, don't worry about it. You'll figure it out. Just make sure that if you're applying for off-campus placements, you are ready for a mental breakdown that you are alone in it. And if you're applying for on-campus placements, you're ready for a mental breakdown that, God, there's so much competition around me in my room only.
Okay, that was a rather detailed answer, and I really like that analogy. So I guess I very much agree with whatever Samath has said, and that in the fact that they both are different kinds of battles, and the fact that campus placements, you kind of feel this sense of security because you see everyone doing it, and then you feel like, okay, everyone, if everyone's doing it, this might not exactly be the wrong thing, and I'm on the right track. But when it comes to off-campus stuff, even like with this is something that I felt personally as well, was the fact that that I have to put in effort from myself, and nobody's gonna question me, hey, are you actually applying for off-campus jobs? Are you reaching out to people on LinkedIn maybe, and maybe doing emails and whatnot? So I guess off-campus placement takes a little bit of self-discipline that one has to cultivate if they don't really have it right away. But yeah, as Samath said, campus placements are a marathon, whereas off-campus placements are going out for a run yourself. So, okay, coming to Yashwant. So, Yashwant, what do you agree with Samath? Whatever Samath says, do you want to add anything to that?
I agree to both of you. Actually, that's so true. I mean, everything has its own struggles. That's so true. And then one specific point I want to talk about is about how Ayush told about the discipline that you have to cultivate for off-campus stuff. In on-campus, it's so true that companies come. I mean, you know what companies are coming. You'll prepare according to that and stuff. But in off-campus, mostly when you're applying, if you're choosing a specific role, it may be or may not be, that company may be or may not be having that role at that time. So you'll have to wait for it. And if your profile is very good, you can convince them to open a role for you. That's a different case. So that is happening. And the thing, and another point is, in on-campus placements, you get a job, you get one job offer, and you have to be with it. And in off-campus, you get to explore a lot. You get a lot of options you can choose from. That is there. And Other than that,
I guess on that note, sorry to interrupt you, Ashwin.
Yeah.
I think on the point that you said, there's a lot more to explore off campus. Even it's a little counterintuitive, I guess, to think about it. But once you think about it, even though we have more options when we are talking about off-campus scenario, don't you think that in an off-campus scenario you end up having a more specific role to your liking, whereas in on-campus placements where you do not have that much options about what you end up doing as like your day job, but you have a more like a random sense of okay, I don't really know what I'm going to do at the end of the day once I get a placement on campus.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Can you just summarize that again?
Sure. So my question kind of is that when we talk about off-campus placements, as Samarth said, as I'd agree, and I'm pretty sure Dheeraj and you would agree as well, that the horizon is extremely vast. And you could think of like any role and you can apply for it, right? Because it's off campus. You are approaching them to like get you to do something. And when we talk about on campus, we say that the options are limited. Hey, you can only be a tester, you can only be a developer, or at times you can only be some other role. But don't you think it's counterintuitive that when you're applying for off campus stuff, you end up with a more specific role, whereas if you are in an on campus scenario, you end up with a more random role, which is like the opposite of their features, I guess, or characteristics that we just said.
Yes, okay, that's true. I mean, when I said we get a lot of exploration thing, what I meant is the companies that you apply for, that we can choose by ourselves. Whether, like, for example, you applied for a company, you got a job, and then you later realize that the work culture may not be that good. You can explore. You can start applying for another company. Position, of course, you decided according to your skill set. But I'm just telling this, you can apply to a lot of companies. You can have a lot of offers from different companies. That's what I tried to say there.
Right. Okay. Understood. Got it. So, Dheeraj, what are your thoughts on like everything that we've been talking about so far?
I have had experiences of both on-campus as well as the off-campus placement, and I agree what you all said. Like, off-campus is like the road which is less traveled by, so people do get afraid while traveling to that road because it involves a lot of hard work. Not only you need to inculcate good technical skills within you, but you also need to know how to market yourself. You need to reach out to recruiters. As Yashwant said, if you have the skill, you can even open a new role in that company if they think that you can contribute to the company. So it's a lot of, you need to be very much focused when you are searching for an off-campus job. But coming to the on-campus job, like if you want some security, like as you told, like others are running, so you can also run and you can grab that job. But again, I have seen people like when they apply for on-campus, they don't know anything about the job profile and anything. They just look at those packages and company and they just grab in the job. But in the later future, they regret about it. Like, this role was not suitable for me. So I'll basically advise all the people who are hearing it, like, you should first decide what you want to do. Then just go to the off-campus or on-campus thing, because in on-campus there might be roles which you are not interested in, but eventually you can switch to that roles in the later future. So that's all from my side.
On that note, Dheeraj, what about the fact that I personally would believe that it's a rather difficult thing to switch actually your roles. I mean, like it's one of those things that you'd call it's easier said than done, because let's say, for example, a guy who's interested in security, right? And security is not I don't want to say unwelcome, but like it's the barrier to entry to my field is I'd say rather huge. So people don't really look for people or like freshers who are going to be an entry level person for them as in security. I mean, like there are jobs obviously, but the number is rather less as compared to the people who want to get those jobs, right? So how would you say that like switching over time is like, how feasible is it? How feasible is to switch a role, starting out something else and ending up with something else?
Yeah, I would like to explain that. So first of all, if you are unsure about that role, like you are very much sure, but suppose a guy who is unsure, like whether he wants to go to security or not, so he can start off with a job in a company in which team switching is very easy and it's feasible. In a company like Amazon, Microsoft, and even in startups like Swiggy, Oyo, whatever the knowledge that I've got from my seniors. So team switching is not that difficult. So you can switch between your roles, but again, it should not be like you are switching directly from a Q&A to a developer. But yeah, you can definitely switch from a SDE role to a security engineer or to a mobile application developer. So it's very much feasible in some of the companies, but as you told, like it's not feasible in all the companies. So almost I'll say like 15 to 20% of the companies, they allow switching of roles.
Yeah, I guess it will be those companies that are either really huge and are looking towards engineering talent rather than like sticking with roles and tags. And then we talk about the budding companies, the startups and all, like you talked about. I think the mid-tier companies stick to predictability, I guess, and that's why they want to have people with specific roles doing specifically what they want them to do, instead of like budding. Figuring out what's working best for a particular guy, right, on an individual level.
Yeah, exactly.
So what about LinkedIn profiles? So you talked about getting off-campus placements, off-campus job offers as well, and like doing interviews and all. So how was your approach about it? Like how much a LinkedIn profile is worth when you're talking about off-campus placements, at least?
Yeah, from my point of view, if I talk about my journey, whatever the off-campus jobs offers that I've got through LinkedIn only. So you need to just prepare a strategy on how to reach on to the recruiters, whom to reach out to. And if your LinkedIn profile stands out, then you have a very good chance. So I have seen like recruiters, they directly contact you as well. Even if you have not contacted them, so you will get some random pings from a recruiter like, hey, I look through your profile, it seems good to me, can we connect sometime? So if your LinkedIn profile is not that appealing, you will not get those kind of offers. So even if you have good skills, but if you can't market them on LinkedIn, then it is useless. So from my point of view, like having a good LinkedIn profile is very much essential for getting an off-campus job. It's basically, it makes the path very easy. Rather than you applying on multiple job portals, it's better if you can approach someone who is working in that company. Either he might refer you, or you can directly contact a recruiter regarding the same.
Right. I think I and you, Yashwant, had a conversation about this, getting a job through LinkedIn profile and reaching out to people, right? Would you want to share that methodology that you talked about?
So yeah, even I totally say a LinkedIn profile is very, very important. And before me coming to that strategy point of how to apply an off-campus like with the LinkedIn profile, I'd say LinkedIn profile is it's very important as your resume, and the updating part of it is also very important. Most people just do it once and then they forget to update it. So make sure you guys update that every one now and then, like when you do a new project or you go to a hackathon or you get a certificate or something. That's one thing. Having good LinkedIn profile, in the sense, some people mistake it and then they post a lot of stuff. So it's good that you post something on LinkedIn, but make sure that doesn't annoy the other person, and make sure when you post something, it's kind of unique. And if you small things people used to share in LinkedIn, so that thing you can avoid that. Even though your profile is very good, people who follows you or someone, when they check out your profile, they look at your activity and it's like, oh, it's like this. This is just a small thing I wanted to say. Another thing about the strategy about getting off-campus jobs through LinkedIn and with your LinkedIn profile is definitely you can reach out to HRs and you can ask them about the profile and everything. But if you think after a while that if you get a rejection, for example, and if you think, oh my god, this person didn't he judged me, in the sense he didn't know how much of efforts I put in and stuff like that, so that might happen. So the best thing is reach out to engineering managers if a company has one, or go to technical vice president and stuff like that. If not, go to the seniors, SDE3 or SDE2s, and at the last you can keep a last resort of SDE1. Because if you tackle from the seniority level, it's because they have this voice on the company. I mean, they have this power in the company. Like if they have this power to move your profile forward in the company, that's why you target from engineering manager to senior engineers, and then go for the junior engineers like that. I mean, having good LinkedIn profile will help you over that in starting a new conversation, because when usually those kind of people who are having a high position in a company, they'll be getting a lot of emails and messages. So they obviously they look at that, but when they read that one simple tagline of yours, the bio of yours, it should be very catchy that they're impressed by that one thing even before opening your profile, and then they start replying to you, and then they'll definitely check out your profile and they'll develop interest on you. So this is very important. Okay.
Right. So adding on to one key point that you said, Yashwant, like not just the profile, but the activity is also very relevant. I mean, like I would totally agree with the fact that if I go and look at someone's profile, no matter how good it looks, if that person has not written, posted, or like reacted on anything for like an year, I am not so sure whether what is up to, and is that guy still around and looking for a job, or maybe he's retired or whatnot. So yeah, I recently like realized this fact like a few months back, I guess, and I started posting myself, and then it actually really helps. Like this is a true story from my end, that it would be the fact that I would be reaching out to people not just for like internships or jobs, but generally because I'm interested in working with them, or like knowing what they have to share and stuff. So talking about that, that switched from the moment that I started posting stuff. I've had a burst of requests coming in for connections, people talking to me. I somehow even had a like guy reach out to me to write a book. I don't know if that'll go through or whatnot, but it's really cool to like see and realize the fact that once you start marketing yourself, as Dheeraj said, people reach out to you instead of you having to put in the effort to reach out to them and like find the relevant people. They reach out to you once you have started showing visibility on your end. So one thing that I'd like to ask Samar, since you're not exactly doing like a software role, so how would you want to do? How did you go about doing like side projects? Like for maybe CS people, it will be developing some app, some project, some website or whatnot. But what about you? What were your side projects as a designer?
So when it comes to side projects, I would kind of link it to LinkedIn as well here, because something I have noticed is that you need to be very very articulated and very direct on what you approach. Like what do you want and what kind of things you want to post. You need to figure out that what is important on your side and what puts you out as a person better. So at the end, when it comes to building projects and doing side roles, I think it's the best way to get some experience, because when you start applying for jobs off campus, the first thing you realize is that nobody's looking for freshers. Everywhere the position and the roles that are written are like 2 to 3 years of experience required, and it just gets worse from that. Then it gets to 7 or 8 years of experience, and that experience is directly related to how much work you've done. So even if you have taken up a side project at a startup, you've worked with them for 6 months, that is something you can tell the technical recruiter or the HR that I have done a side role for 6 months, so that counts as my experience. I mean, it does not count as a job, but it adds some value to it. So that really helps out in that sense, because at the end, if you're applying for a fresher position and there are no positions, you need a way to stand out in comparison to any other fresher out there, and you need a way in which you can compete with people who have 2 to 3 years of experience. So that would help you out in a bigger sense. Then the next thing is building a profile. I think building a profile is very, very important, because I think that there is a huge experience issue in how recruitments work nowadays. I mean, people hate LinkedIn, but that's the only way to go about recruitment, so you have to stick to LinkedIn. I mean, people have started posting certificates. If you scroll through LinkedIn, you will see at least 20 people posting the same certificate. So that makes it, I mean, it's fine for our side, but it makes it very difficult for the recruiter side. So just imagine they go to a profile that has posted so many certificates. But at the end, when they look at the certificates, they look at it that it's a very basic level of thing, and it is divided into different domains. So it kind of does not add impact to your profile as well. So you need to be very sure of what you want to post. I mean, as Yashwant and Ayush said, you have to decide and you have to post. That is very important, that you have to post. So you need to be very sure that okay, I want to apply for this position, so I want to post on this. If you're applying for a product design role, so you want to post on that stuff. But that does not mean that if you've done a side certification, you post that as well. I mean, add that to your certifications, but you need to highlight what is important to you and what is important to your job role, and that's how you build a profile as well. And that is where your experience matters as well. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
Right. So at least on the certificate thing, yeah, I'm totally in for whatever you're saying. Like my feed is filled with people like putting up certificates, say I got this course completion certificate and whatnot. But I guess the point I'll differ a little from what you were saying is, instead of just posting about the certificate, I think it's fine to post about something that you're happy about, and it's in any ways like a technical thing. It's not random, I don't know, not related to career certificate. But instead of just saying, hey, you know what, I got this certification, I think it will make more sense to talk about what you learned, like what one learned from a course, what was interesting in that course, and why do you think that course actually matters for like the people that you're trying to get the visibility from. Why would it matter to them about like you getting a certificate? I mean, there's a difference that I say. There's a difference between certificates and certifications, where certificates is just a course that you're posting about. And for people who just blatantly post certificates, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't personally mind it. But I'd like to talk to them about the fact that if you're posting, say for example, if you're doing a course on Coursera or Udemy for that matter, and then you complete it and then you post a certificate on LinkedIn, right? It's just another course. It's not a certification. So if you're willing to post that course, why do you not like update your LinkedIn or put up a post every time you complete a semester with the 5 or so subjects that you've gone through that semester? Because they also are courses, right? So I actually think people need to understand the fact that whether or not you have a certificate about a course is not really something that I'm interested in. I'd rather know what you actually learned from that. And people need to understand the difference between certificates and certifications. Certifications are when from an authority of that topic. For example, if you talk about AWS, so the best people to talk about AWS are people from AWS, right? So if you have a certification from AWS saying, hey, this guy certified to do certain stuff, it makes sense to share that, because now I know, hey, the highest authority has like kind of guaranteeing that, okay, this guy knows his things and his stuff around say AWS. But completing a course on Python to do data science is not exactly something that I'd want to know about, because if you're say applying for a data science role, I would actually expect you to know certain stuff, and would not have to want to go to your LinkedIn profile to see, hey, whether or not this guy has done a course on data science with Python or something. So I guess, yeah, that's kind of my take on it. So okay, let's move on to something else now. So we talked about what's right and applying for different kinds of roles, and what different kinds of role entail. They might or might not include DSA and everything. So what I think we want to do is like talk about how we decided our roles, and maybe that will help people out who want to know how to go about deciding what they want to do in life. Because a lot of people starting out in colleges have this issue that they have not exactly, for example, again talking specifically about a lot of people who take up CS, because that's one of the most hottest branches, I guess I'll say, in engineering. So when people from branches like bio or some other branches come into the college and take up CS, and they've not really done any CS like in +2 and like their 11th and 12th, so they might find a bunch of things interesting. For example, they might find OS interesting. They might want to learn more about how to build compilers. They're happy with like web development. And a guy who's interested in all three might get confused about what they want to do. So why don't we like start with Dheeraj? Dheeraj, how would you say, like, how do you go about deciding what's the correct role and what one should do? And maybe you could also talk about how you prepared and decided that you wanted to be a full stack software engineer.
Yeah. So the first thing that's very important is if it's better if you experiment with a lot of stuffs, then only it's better that you can choose a role. So if you have experimented with a lot of tech, then you exactly know what tech you want to work on, or should you progress with that technology or not. And if you have just gone through all the phases of a software development lifecycle, like if you have done a bit of testing, if you have been done a bit of development, then you know that if you like testing more than development, so maybe you can opt on for roles which are more related to testing and quality assurance. But if you have not experimented with the stuffs, then it becomes very much difficult to choose on a role. So in that case, you must go with a very generic role, that is a SDE. So from there, it's very easy to switch on to a different role. So from my perspective, if you have experimented, then you already know which role you want to go. But if you have not, then go with SD. And coming to my journey, I have done Android development, I have done cross-platform React Native, as well as um, front-end web development in React, Angular. So I like to juggle between the technologies, and I just like problem solving. So that's why I chose SD, because every day I like some problem thrown at me and I solve it with the tool that I have with my toolkit bag. So I like to learn new technologies rather than mastering it on a whole, but learn it when I need it. So that's my take on that.
Okay, so yeah, I totally agree with you, Dheeraj, over there with the fact that one needs to experiment. Like that's exactly kind of what I did. So I had this sense of what I want to do in life. Like I wanted a career in security, and yeah, I worked towards that. But like to go, like I always had this thing, which I guess a lot of people would have, is that fact that they are a little anxious about, hey, what if I miss out on this domain that I might like, right? So I deal with that anxiety by doing and like learning about that field. So like Yashwant and Dheeraj have done a lot of stuff. I also learned, like I start off with Python, obviously. So Python has been there always with me, and I still work with that. But I then tried my hand on front end. I didn't really like it, but I know like a decent amount of it, I guess, to at least see and like work with it if I have to. I've done backend. I tried to learn ML. I didn't really like it. And then a bunch of other things as well. But as it turned out, I was right about what I wanted to do, and then I was able to like figure out how to go about that. And the experience that I've gathered from all the experiments that I did was not wasted. Like that's one of like a meta plus point, I guess I'd say, that even though you might not want to end up in that field, or you choose not to go into that field, but I guess you still knowing that field would anyways help you. Like even if you don't develop for a living, I guess, like for my job, I don't really do a lot of development, but it's imperative that I know how things work. And having the fact that I've done development, I kind of have this sense of, okay, this is how this application be working at the back end, and here's I can break it. And this experimentation kind of always like grows on iteratively, like even in the domain that you've selected. For me, last year I wanted to be the cliched hacker, right? Guy breaking into stuff and all. But then I got this perspective that, hey, everyone's doing that. And a more tedious and a more, a little, in my opinion, a more disciplined side to security is the defensive bit, which people don't talk about. Like if there's a big hack, right? Like if there's a breach or something that's happening, people always go on and be like, hackers are so dangerous and whatnot. But there are plenty of instances that we don't know about, and there's attacks were defended against, like having Akamai defend the DDoS against GitHub and stuff like that. So these are things that the technical circle knows, but not the people in general. So someone like your families, or like my family, wouldn't really know that I defended something, because there was no news and there was no attack, and hence it's kind of like the silent warrior thing that I figured that I ended up in like the defensive side of security, like having more interest towards that. Anyways, coming back to Yashwant, what would you say was your way to figure out, hey, I want to be an app developer, a mobile application developer?
it was something similar to how you guys figured out how you wanted to do what you guys wanted to do. In the sense, first, even I was clueless and I entered the college. I mean, what I had to do and all. So first, well, my first year went on in just doing competitive programming, exploring different languages like JavaScript, Python, Java, everything. And then later on, it was by accident that I started doing under development, because we once wanted to do work on a project, and then everyone chose their own thing. So my friends chose one backend, one machine learning, and one front end. And also, I was forced to do the app side of it, but I ended up liking it at that moment itself. The thing where you just do something and then it just turns up on your phone, that excited me. But that's me. So that's how I decided it. But as everyone's saying, so you have to have this T model learning. I've heard about this somewhere, I'm not sure where, but people talk about this T model learning. So there is the vertical bar and that's the horizontal bar in T. So the horizontal bar is your width of knowledge, in the sense how many technologies that you're good with. For example, front end, back end, blockchain, AI, and whatnot. And you have to choose one superpower for yourself. That is the vertical line in the T, that where you know the in depth of that field. And I chose mobile development for that, because I started with that, and then I explored what is that, front end development, and I went through back end and then blockchain and all. And as Ayush, I also hated machine learning, and so that that superpower that you have to decide which you like, whichever gives you this sense of satisfaction that you have built something, whichever makes you very excited. That's one. I mean, these are very common things that you will hear from everyone, that go with the things that's exciting to you. But you'll feel that once you really do something that makes you exciting. I don't know how to put it, but I'm telling you, you'll feel that once you start exploring a lot of things, that this is going to be what I'll be doing.
Okay, so yeah, that T learning path is actually really interesting, and I'll look at it later. But coming to Samath, so yours is like the most out there thing that one engineer can do, right? Because none of us were design like graduates, I guess, and none of us were learning how to design stuff while you were. And being an engineer, BTech is not exactly a design degree. So how did you go about being a designer, getting a job from that, and stuff around it?
So actually, just like Yashwant, I stumbled on design by mistake. I in my first couple of years starting out in my university, I wanted to be a web developer. But coming down to the line, I later realized with the feedback that I got that I'm not that good at web development. So I had to shift to a thing that could probably be better for me. And I thought, okay, let's try and make something beautiful. So I got into the creative design space. And when I got into it, I kind of, just like Yashwant said, I think the word Yashwant wanted to use was love at first sight. That's probably how you figure out what you want to do. Once you get into a domain and you look at the community around it, that is the point you realize I want to do this. Because when you get into a topic, you just don't start out by learning stuff and start making stuff. When you start learning stuff, you search for stuff online and you get involved with the community. And by getting involved in the community, it does not mean that you reply to comments or you talk to people online. It just means if you even read that stuff that people have posted, or the developments that are going on, or you're reading some technical blogs or something like that, that helps out. And that's the point in your life where you realize, okay, this is something I really, really like. And when I started out with design and I got into the UX side of things, I kind of got that feeling. Yes, I want to build something, and I want to take decisions which would be reflected on millions of devices. And that's something that really motivated me. I mean, I really like the concept that developers make something that comes on this lane, but I really wanted something that they do that, but the person taking that decision is me. So I really like that authority, I would say. So yeah, that was the reason. And when it comes to applying for a design role or something like that, it's fairly simple. I mean, it's just like any other job. There is no special treatment to it. But all I can say is design is growing like crazy. It's expanding like crazy, and it has already expanded like crazy because of the startups that are coming up, because of the old companies that are rebranding, because the generation is changing a lot, and the mindset of people is changing a lot, and the thought process of people is changing a lot. The things they look at is also changing a lot. People are dressing differently, people are talking differently, people are consuming content differently. So everything is getting rebranded, be it your oldest applications or be it your new applications. Everything is getting rebranded, everything is getting changed. Your old applications, Amazon, Flipkart, your new applications like any startup like Swiggy or Zomato, those are also getting changes. So that's where a UX designer comes in, or a developer also comes in, where there's a lot of opportunity for changing stuff, and it's one of the most growing markets out there. And when it comes out to picking out a job in UX field, the community is very helpful. It's a beautiful community to be a part of. People are super nice, people are super helpful. If you look at any LinkedIn post from any designer out there, they're always ready to help. You can ping anybody, and I'm very sure anybody would help you out. And each and every company has their own different way of approaching to it, and that is the only drawback of being a designer, that each and every company has their own design sense. Everybody uses a different tool, everybody has it's a very small team, right? And even in that team, everybody might be using a different tool. So you need to be very well versed with what company is using what, and that's how you target. So if you really like Figma over Sketch, then choose a company that prefers building UI components in Figma. If you really like the Adobe atmosphere, then probably choose a company that uses that over the Sketch atmosphere. So it's up to you. It's a little bit of research. It's not a difficult research. Search for any interaction designer in any company, and they would have probably posted about it, or it might be on their website. Or just reach out to any person in that company, and they'll reply to you on that. And if you have a company target, just align to their concepts. If you really want to get into Google, and you look at that, okay, Google uses Adobe XD, okay, then I have to align to Adobe XD. There's no option for you.
On that note, Samarth, so one question. I can understand the fact that when you say every company has their own design sense, right? So that's something, I guess, that's true for software, or like basically the way that they've been doing things. Like every company has their own way to do things. But talking about like tools, right? As developers, so there's a standard set of tools that one might need to use, say for example Git or something. But I would say that, say Adobe XD or Sketch or Figma is the designer's ID, right? As if you compare it with like the developer's world, or like any other development job for that matter. So would you really say that tools are also important when it comes to design, which is not entirely true of development? Because I work with Visual Studio Code, right? I don't really use an IDE that much, and for people who are doing this day in day out, IDE is way more preferred than just a text editor or a code editor. So but then they have this freedom of choosing whether they want to use something like a JetBrains IDE or NetBeans IDE, or maybe PyCharm for doing it, or Visual Studio. So do you say that design is a place where you'd have to stick to a tool if you're applying for a certain company?
I would not say stick to a tool, but I would say that you should have a preference on your side, because that's one of the main questions that people ask when they're recruiting. So just a brief introduction on how interviews happen. You have an HR round, then you have a technical round. That happens in every company. There's more steps involved in each and every company, but that's the basic crux of it. So when you're talking to a technical person, he's the person who's doing that job that you are applying for. So you need to fit in that person's mind. And one of the main questions they ask is that, what tool do you use? And at that situation, if you look at a company, and let's say you prefer, let's say, tool X, and that company uses tool Y, you say tool Y because that company prefers tool Y, he might ask you a question that might not suit you. So just be prepared for that. You can have your own choice. That's not a problem at all. Each and every company is very, very flexible in design tools. Let's just say in terms of my company, I have, let's say it's 10 designers in my company. Each and every person uses a different tool. I mean, it's a different task, and we are trying to align to that. But yeah, everybody uses a different tool. But if you research on what company uses what tool and what is their primary tool, you would kind of understand that okay, these kind of questions can come into me. If a company is using tool X, you can research on that tool X. Or even if you do not want to research on that tool X and you like another tool, just focus on that tool, and do not even if they ask you about tool X, just say that I haven't worked with tool X. I like the other tool, and if you ask me anything about that, I can probably do that. And since I know how to use the other tool, I can easily translate to this tool, and I can understand this tool as well. So focus on one tool. Do not get into the habit of okay, this new thing has come in, so I'll go there. It's good to check it out once, but don't keep switching your workflow every month. Just stick to one. That's the answer. The companies don't, selecting a tool does not matter at a company, I would say.
Basically, like if you boil it down, you're talking about like the T learning way that Yashwant talked about, like knowing different tools and how they work and all, but like focusing on one to build your finesse on, and then
100%.
not giving into the shiny new thing syndrome. Basically, like trying new things is fine, but then okay, now I want to completely switch to something that's not been tried and tested and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, if you build that habit, that might cause a problem for you in your professional career. So don't build that habit.
Totally. Yes, and yeah, obviously, of course, if you do not build a finesse over one tool, at least it's like being the jack of all trade and master of none, then you'd end up being a jack of for the like entirety of your career, I guess, right? So okay, that's kind of the end of whatever questions that are generic to like placements and getting a job and stuff like that. But the scenario that all of us are in right now, not just like us four, but like everyone out there in the world, is that there's been lockdowns and there's seclusion of people. People are practicing social distancing, and that obviously has also affected the job scenarios and the way people have been working across the globe. And it's obviously forced a lot of companies that were like monolithic in structure and were not exactly remote friendly to switch to a remote scenario, wherein they either have to equip the employees. This is not specific to tech, but like in general, to be able to work remotely, be it teachers or like professors. Even like I've come across people who are doing law stuff on like doing their casework online and stuff like that. But talking specifically about tech, there's been a lot of tension amongst people who are looking for internships right now. For example, people who are in their third year of bachelor's, especially in India, this is the time or like the season where they start out looking for internships and potentially hires, right, as like a full-time employee. So I guess my thought on this would be like it's like a two-pronged thing. On the one side, it definitely has caused a lot of reductions in the workforce that people have because there's budget cuts, and depending upon the company, it depends on whether they're making revenue or not. And if from a business point of view, any company ends up having to owe their functionalities and functions, features and whatnot to the business that they're doing, if it's not able to sustain the number of people that they have right now, they have to like let go of people, right? But on the other side, we also have companies that have been ingenious about it and then figured out working remotely, and that has opened a lot of opportunities for the companies as well as like freelancers or like people who are looking for jobs, because now they don't have to work on the constraint that I can only look for jobs in my geographical region. For example, now if I want to work in a company in say US, I may or may not necessarily need a visa to go there, because visa is required if I have to go there physically. But if they're willing to have this as a remote job, I can do it from India and make a lot of money as well while working on something that I like, so in a company that I might not have the opportunity to work for otherwise. So Let's go around everyone and like ask their thoughts on it. So Dheeraj, what do you think? What's the impact of COVID-19 and the coronavirus scare that's out there right now, and like the job scenarios that we have?
Yeah, Corona
Talking.
has impacted a lot. Like people now, all of them, they are working remotely. But as it has reduced a lot of job opportunities, considering the current scenario of startups like Oyo and all those things, whose business has gone down like a lot. But it has opened a lot of opportunities, as you said, for remote job opportunities, and people have started adapting this new normal way of working on from home. And even many companies, they are trying to make it permanent, because it's helping increase the productivity for some of them. And coming to the on-campus perspectives, like most of the big companies, they are still recruiting, but again they are recruiting less in numbers. So the competition has definitely increased, but still there are a lot of opportunities which are unexplored by many of the students, like the remote job opportunities of the outside India. So that will come into the spotlights now.
Okay. Yeah, in fact, I've heard of a lot of companies switching to remote, not at least full time, but like at least till the end of the year. As far as I know, Google, for one, has told all its employees to stay at home and work from home till 2020 ends.
Yeah.
So I guess it's definitely going around. So what's your day like, Jashwant? You've been working from home, right? I believe.
Yes, I've been working from home since March, and it's been quite a journey because you get extended working hours and your productivity is increased. The company is happy, you work a lot, and you are happy because you're staying with your parents, and those things are there. Another thing is you really lose track of when weekday starts and when weekend starts, and you end up getting work even during weekends. And that's my work from home experiences. But coming to this COVID-19 impact, I would say yes, it has impacted, but I still say you still have hopes, especially in the computer science world. This software jobs, companies are still running, the services are still going on, so they do require jobs. Again, it's again based on the company that you apply for. For example, Ola and Uber nowadays, they are facing financial crisis, but then all other like food and healthcare based startups are gaining a lot of traction nowadays. So I'd purely say it depends on what company you apply for. So make sure when you apply for a company, research more about that company and then proceed. That's all.
So yeah, I kind of totally agree with this, that it actually depends on the company, or like where basically one's applying for a job or an internship. Because obviously in the end, if the company is not able to afford you, irrespective of what work or what skills you possess, they are not going to hire you. So coming to you, Samat, what's your take on the job scenario? Like, how difficult is it for me, not me, but like for anyone to get a job or an internship as a designer right now, like in this situation?
What I'll say is that let's get a little philosophical here. I mean, anything related to COVID, you just have to look at it positively. I mean, the more negativity you add to yourself, it'll get much worse for you. So just take this as the glass is half full. It's not half empty. So just look at the positives from it. Don't look at the negatives from it. You look at social media. You look at that this company has fired these many people. This company has fired these many people. This company has shut down this office. Yes, that's happening, and that is something that is happening. But what people are not realizing is that if offices are shut, the companies are adapting to a different model. Each and every company is shifting to a different model. Each and every company is moving out of something and moving into a role. They'll have new opportunities that open up, because at the end companies need to survive, right? Just because a pandemic hit and they cannot incorporate more people, that does not mean the company would shut down. These are big companies. They need to figure out how to handle in such a situation. So they will shift their models. Many companies have started shifting their models. Most companies have added services to their models. So that opens up more opportunities. And similarly, as Ayush said, you get opportunities from all around the world. So just imagine you were getting opportunities from one country. Now you're getting them from over 200 countries. So just keep that in mind. So you get more opportunities, I would say. I mean, it's a difficult time. I completely agree. It's a difficult time for everybody out there, but it's a difficult time for you. But it's also a difficult time for each and every other person out there. So it's equal. So just keep yourself positive. I mean, I'll just give an example for myself. I started searching for a job like around 1 month back. It was difficult, but when I looked at it, there were so many openings out there, like so many openings out there, and companies are very willing to look at talent at the nowadays rather than looking for college placements and marks. So you're in the golden. You have so much time in your hands. Work on projects, put it out online, get the impact out there, and then it's not difficult to get a job in this scenario. I mean, a lot of people are putting it out that these many jobs have been lost, so more will happen. Yes, recessions work like that, and that happens in everybody's lifetime. It happens every 50 years, so you need to be aware of that, and it'll happen again also. So you need to be prepared for that. But one thing people don't realize is that look at the graphs. Right after the recession, there's a boom in jobs as well, right? Because during recessions, people are at home and new startups come up, new opportunities come up. So take it in as a positive aspect and look at it as a positive. If you're positive, if you reflect yourself, even if you get one opportunity and you're positive for that opportunity, you're going to land that opportunity. If you get 10 opportunities and you're negative in your life, you're not going to land any opportunities. Just keep positive. Just keep a smile on your face and keep applying, I would say.
Right. So positivity is the key, I guess, is the key takeaway. One thing that I kind of like want to emphasize on, and maybe you guys can pitch in as well, is that given we talked about this global scenario, right, that people can now get jobs from across the globe, but this is an opportunity, I guess, for people who were looking for off-campus placements. I'm pretty sure this is the year if it will be easier to get an off-campus placement than an on-campus one, because this time it's not just your geographical area that you're looking for. You're just looking for anybody. In fact, it's not you looking for them. It's people across the globe looking for people, suitable people to give their internships or jobs to. So given that campuses are closed off and like people are not on campuses, hence there's no technical round as such for right now, and there's a bit of a learning curve as well as like a setup time span that people have or colleges have to invest in to get this thing up and running for like on campus scenarios. But off campus things are going on, and I believe that if you're looking, or if you weren't looking at least for an off campus thing, this is probably the right time to bring in all the things that you probably heard on this episode about getting your LinkedIn profile sorted, gaining visibility, posting the right things, doing side projects, figuring out what you want to do in life, and then just go about it and like find a job for you. And you might be happier that you've gotten a thing and be chilled out for the next semester instead of having to stress about it like till the end of your college days. So on that note, I guess that covers like this episode on placements that we had for you guys. Thank you everyone for listening in to this episode, and we hope to see you for the next time. If you have any suggestions or any ideas for things that you want to hear on our podcast, please reach out to me, Samarth, Dheeraj, or Yashwant on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you can find us, and we'll be happy to take up your suggestions. See you next time.